Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Prof, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. I think we are ready to start as other members join and other students can join in. Uh, Without wasting much of the time, let me just welcome you and all the participants to this very important forum for us. I want to welcome students, professors, and generally those of us who love African history to this very important session, the very first one in the master class series. I'm aware that members are joining from different locations and from different time zones. A number of my students are also joining through a common shared class session. So I want to really thank all of you for finding time to join us and for heeding our call to be part of this very maiden conversation around African history. I want to specifically thank Professor Falola for selflessly and innovatively coming up with this great idea of a masterclass uh, being free online lessons on African history. I know that it's about 2 a.m. In the US where he's located, and I want to really thank him for the sacrifice and, of course, heeding to this very, very important cause. I'll be very brief in my introductory remarks because the gist of our discussion will be centered on the talk that will be provided by Professor Toyin Falola. And in my very brief introduction, I'd like to say the following. It is not possible to talk about history without talking about historians. Historians are people who study and interpret the past. They investigate events, people, cultures, and societies by examining evidence that we have in the various documents, artifacts, and many other sources that we have. As one of the most famous Irish playwrights and poet, Oscar Wilde, once said, anybody can write history, but only a great man. Anybody can make history, but only a great man can write it. Professor Toyin Falola, as you may all know, born in Nigeria, but currently based at the Department of History, University of Texas at Austin, belongs to a very enviable generation of historians who have made immense contributions to African history. He is one of the leading voices on African studies today. He is a great teacher and researcher whose towering contributions to African history through research, writing, and service to humanity cannot be missed. He has published over 150 books, and of course, still counting. Those of us who read, and if you just try to Google and check, he has received over 30 lifetime awards from very prestigious global institutions. He is a staunch defender of African knowledge systems and has consistently cautioned African scholars to be aware of the various colonial knowledge systems that undermine, misrepresent, and of course denigrate the continent's history and also its peoples. His major concern, especially with the methodology of African historiography, his role in interdisciplinary research, and his faith in Africa and African knowledge systems is unmatched. So we have a great person before us as listeners. When I first met Professor Falola physically, around 2023 after an interaction. I have never missed to read his great contributions to African history. I'm a great follower of his writings. We cite most of his publications in our classes, and I'm happy that majority of those who are attending this masterclass are my students in themes in African history, and I really want to welcome them. I think this is going to be a great session to us. And for those students from other universities and other countries who are joining us, please feel free to interact with us in this session. It is one of its own kind. Professor Falola is not just an academic, he's a mentor, he's a supporter and a celebrant of most of the histories and cultures of our people. In 2023, 2024, he gave a series of lectures in Kenya and specifically in KU, made very personal contributions of books and other writings to our department and, of course, the university. And we cannot thank him enough for what he has been able to do. He has celebrated many African scholars, those who have gone ahead of us and those who are still alive. In the Kenyan case, I think those of us who remember in 2025, when we lost our great historian, Professor B. Ogot, and of course our great playwright, Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Professor Toyin Falola was on the forefront in leading what has now been a very famous conversation around Falola lectures and interviews to celebrate the life where scholars were able to eulogize and talked about the methodology, the theoretical framing of Africa and African studies across the world. And we find this as a very energetic process, sacrifice that cannot be really thanked enough. The masterclass is a very innovative idea, and we thank him for giving us this opportunity to be the first team to host this kind of idea. Like most of his ideas, all of them aim at celebrating African history. We want to produce a generation of African scholars who can interact, who can talk, who can read, and of course interpret history, not just practically, but also theoretically. There is a very heavy discussion around the African contribution to theory, something that we hardly interact with in our own classes. We want to enrich this kind of conversation as we move forward. So without wasting much of the time, maybe I'll talk briefly about the organization of this lecture. We will allow Professor Falola to talk for approximately 1 hour, uninterrupted. We are also going to allow a conversation around a question and answer in the next set of hours. In the next set, the second hour, possibly 40 to 50 minutes. So if you have any questions that you really, I know that most of you guys, especially my students, have already sent advanced questions, which I was able to share with Professor Falola. But should you have more questions, we'll be very, very happy to receive them. Those of you who have my email address so that we can forward for a very enhanced conversation thereafter. So without taking much of the time, allow me to welcome Professor Toyin Falola to take up the space. We are just hitting 361. I know most of the other members are still joining in, but this is a time program and we don't want to take much of that waiting. So Professor Toyin Falola, once more, thank you very much for finding time to be with us. And thank you very much for waking up that early for us. I think we appreciate your sacrifice and your knowledge. The space is yours, Prof. We are looking forward to your very useful discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Peter Wekesa, for this lovely introduction. Greetings to all of you who have joined. I'm very grateful to universities that are partnering with us, hosting this. Some put their students in one hall to join this conversation. Thank you very much. I will give a lecture. Questions have been sent to our site, over 100 questions. I will not be the one choosing the questions to answer. Professor Wekesa will select randomly from the most important questions. I've titled this lecture, Decolonizing Knowledge, African Studies, Intellectual Resistance, and My Intervention. I need to quickly say that in adding my own intervention, it was not my own idea. It was Kenyatta University that insisted that I must talk about that. So my fellow students and colleagues and researchers, independent scholars, members of the public who aspire for knowledge, the tradition you and I belong to is one that is laden and full of hope at the same time. That sounds like a contradiction. Yes, it is. Laden because the intellectual history of Africa, which we inherit from the previous generation, was constructed and transmitted through filters, silencing and marginalizing. Also because we have the means and the methods to question and construct the tradition while constructing and reconstructing it at the same time. Let me emphasize one more time. Knowledge is not neutral. There's no such a thing as a neutral knowledge. Even the stories that our ancestors told about the tortoise, about the spider, about the antelope, they are not neutral stories. Knowledge is created within structures of power. Knowledge is authorized within institutions. And knowledge is passed on for ideological purposes. Decolonization of knowledge that I'm talking about this morning is not just a process of critique and rejection. Neither does it involve acts of revenge. Rather, we are seeking the demand for epistemic justice, a demand that recovers the right of our people, our continent, to think as a subject, to generate knowledge and theories, and to reclaim our rightful place in the pantheon of world intellectuals. This is an introductory lecture. For those who are interested, we are going to do an intermediate one, which will just deal with theories. And for those who want a certificate, we'll do the advanced one, which may also require asking them to do projects. And collaborating institutions will issue them a certificate with a fellowship. In this introduction, I will take you through the history of Eurocentric knowledge construction. I will talk about the epistemological challenge of decolonization. I will speak to the role played by African intellectuals and the contributions, my own contributions, and those of other scholars that we have made to this noble task. But why must you take decolonization as important? For those of you new to this topic and to those of you who are familiar with it, let me tell you why this is very important. We should care about decolonization for many reasons. In the first place, it is not a slogan and it's not a thing of the past, but a continuous process and project aimed at dismantling colonial legacies, the negative ones, in our intellectual, cultural, and institutional production and consumption of knowledge. While political independence from colonial rule may have been achieved, and some people will doubt that, that's why they call it flag independence. Colonization of mindsets, how we think, of structures, education systems, ways of knowing, which is my own particular interest, and ways of thinking, another interest of mine, continue to impact us and our understanding of Africa. A second reason, decolonization deals with epistemic justice. A significant portion of the curriculum in African educational institutions is based on external perspectives that overlook or marginalize African voices, experiences, languages, philosophies, and knowledge systems. Using Kenya as an example, because of our partners, intellectual giants like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Frantz Fanon, Chinua Achebe, and others have written extensively on how colonialism stripped Africans of their languages, cultures, and identity. By taking decolonization seriously, students, especially the younger ones, can begin to center African experiences and perspectives in their learning journeys. In this journey, they have to value oral traditions. They have to pay attention to indigenous knowledge systems, African languages, and they must appreciate the contributions of African scholars across discipline. Decolonization also allows African students to define themselves and their identities. Colonialism painted Africa as primitive, dependent, and in need of salvation. Without conscious decolonial thought and action, these narratives persist in textbooks, media, and international relations. Some people have joined from Botswana, and you see how Botswana is defined through just one movie, God Must Be Crazy. You must question these assumptions and work to define what it means to be African on your own terms, based on African histories and contexts, rather than inherited colonial definitions. This is true whether you speak French or Arabic, Swahili or English, or any other African language. The fourth reason why you must take this subject seriously is that it has practical benefits to understand and improve the African condition. Many African political systems, legal frameworks, economic models are based on colonial structures that may not serve current African realities. Students who ignore decolonization, and I hope you are not one of them, risk perpetuating systems ill-suited for their communities. Instead, by taking decolonization seriously, You can learn to think critically about development from African perspectives and contexts rather than relying on outside blueprints. This reflects the themes I've discussed in my own book, that we must know about Africa through the lens that will reveal Africa. The fifth reason is that decolonization promotes critical consciousness and intellectual independence. I'm not asking you to dismiss all Western knowledge. That's not what I'm saying. But learn to question everything and think critically. You can still read, learn, and use knowledge from Western and Asian sources, other sources that are available to you, while holding power accountable and seeking knowledge from Africa and Africans as well. Students who engage with decolonial thought are less likely to support intellectual dependency, and they are better prepared to engage with the world. They can also become creators and producers of knowledge. The sixth reason why you must take this seriously is that decolonization is a long-term investment in more representative and equitable global knowledge production. The world is not fair. It has never been fair in the past, and it won't be fair in the future. So, power, knowledge production is centered in the global north. Those of you who care about decolonization will want to change that and shift power to the global south. Whether it's true, how you think, what you read, what you publish, how you teach, how you build digital knowledge platforms, how you create new research and innovation across disciplines, decolonization matters. My final reason in appealing to you to take decolonization seriously is because it's about our future, individual, collective. We need new thinking, research, and innovation, just as much as we need critical examination of the past. That will include building the universities of the future, setting research agendas, developing our technology, and using technology like AI responsibly. Without a decolonial lens, AI will swallow up centuries of colonial biases and think for you. If AI thinks for you, and you do not know how to decolonize the knowledge from it, we are returning to epistemic slavery. The students who are listening to me, you are the future. You have to learn from the past, and you have to use the knowledge you acquire to move Africa forward. And you cannot move Africa forward without decolonization. What are the historical background to this? I want to lay the background in this third segment of this lecture. Eurocentric knowledge production on Africa. That is the background. So we have two backgrounds: hegemonic domination, political domination, colonial domination. Those are the political framework. But there is the knowledge framework. And we must know that the genealogy of knowledge on Africa has a lot to do with the history of the Atlantic slave trade, missionary encounters, and European expansion. For centuries, The continent has appeared as an object for exploration, as an object for domination and for exploitation, rather than an equal member. Even though the period of enlightenment has come to be regarded as a time of reason, it also implied a division of humanity into inferior parts, with some considering Africa having no history at all, and the Hegel is famously cited. Africa is no historical part of the world, to quote him. That is one of the most devastating sentences written about Africa. In the phase known as colonization, this has entailed the creation of knowledge for the purposes of ruling and exploitation. Administration, missionary activity, anthropological studies have led to the construction of certain types of texts in the colonial archives. Reports, accounts of travels, ethnographies, and other pieces of official correspondence. In this construction, Africa is described as stagnant, primitive, and backward. The construction did not emerge due to ignorance, as many people tend to claim, but was an intellectual construction in the process of domination of Africa. Under such conditions, education was used as a means for the spread of such knowledge. The curricula taught in schools created by colonizers included lessons emphasizing the significance of European history, literature, and philosophy. This meant that an African learner had to assimilate foreign epistemologies of Europeans at the cost of losing out on their own indigenous epistemology. In effect, this led to what could be referred to as intellectual alienation. A state where the colonized individual becomes alienated from his or her own epistemic origins. The institutions of knowledge production have remained mostly intact even after political liberation. In African universities, the Eurocentric curricula were replicated, while scholarly validation continued to be done using Western theory. The fact remains clear here. Decolonization cannot be attained through political liberation only. It must be epistemological as well. Another key aspect of this process was the rejection of any African archives that failed to meet the criteria of Western archival practices. Oral tradition, performance, ritual, and memory were considered unreliable or unscientific. But these were precisely the means through which Africans had historically recorded their own histories, philosophies, and social structures. The elevation of written to oral tradition was neither a benign nor a value-neutral methodology. It was an act of exclusion that made entire bodies of knowledge invisible. I want to move to part 4, conceptual framing. What do we mean when we say decolonizing knowledge? What do we mean? Decolonization of knowledge involves a conscious effort to undo the epistemic domination that occurred in the process of engagement with slavery and the slave trade during the colonial period, and it means building new knowledge systems that embrace plurality and context. It involves both critique and alternatives. What is essential in the process of decolonization is the liberation of epistemology. Epistemology should no longer be tied to the idea that Western ways of knowing have a monopoly on validity. It does not mean rejecting Western knowledge, but rather making it not central to the interpretation of African realities. Indeed, in my previous works, I maintain that decolonization involves, I want to quote myself, freeing African knowledge from the chains of foreign validation, demanding that Africa must talk for itself in intellectual discourse. This necessitates an understanding of the situatedness of knowledge, which arises out of certain historical cultural conditions, and the fact that there is no privileged way of knowing or validating knowledge. An essential aspect of this task involves what I characterize as methodological pluralism, meaning that we must widen the definition of what counts as evidence to incorporate traditions, proverbs, songs, rituals, material cultures. In doing so, we are not simply recognizing different cultural expressions, but rather acknowledging the presence of knowledge in such expressions. When we include indigenous sources, we are doing an epistemic justice. When we exclude them, we are engaged in epistemic injustice. Decolonization involves bringing back the initiative to African people and putting it where it belongs, at the very heart of the matter. Africa has been treated like the object of theoretical discourse for far too many years now, and it should take on an active role and contribute to its own theoretical insights, to all forms of knowledge, to science and technology. As one can clearly see, decolonization does not imply glorification. What it means is not a direct change from a Eurocentric approach to Afrocentric one without any questioning whatsoever, but scientific research in which any theory becomes critically assessed and criticized. In the fifth segment of this lecture, I want to talk about specific interventions by African scholars. What intellectual interventions that our intellectuals have made? The struggle for the retrieval of the knowledge of Africa has been shaped by many scholars across various generations who have attempted to subvert the dominant discourse and broaden the scope of historiography. While introducing me, Professor Wekesa mentioned Ugot, Betwell Ugot, a major historian of Kenya. He mentioned Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a major creative from Kenya and larger Africa and its diaspora. We cannot but mention Kenneth Onwuka-Dike, who showed that the history of Africa could be written through primary sources emanating from our own people and their own voices. Using the Niger Delta region in his pioneering work on African history published in the 1950s, he found complex structures of politics and economics that were already present long before decolonization. And in addition to this, he and others established the Ibadan School of History, and the contributors to that series were respected scholars, showed how oral sources, indigenous archives, and new methodological approaches can be used to create epistemological innovations. And this line of thought could be seen in sociology, in philosophy, political science. For instance, V.Y. Mudimbe of blessed memory wrote The Invention of Africa, where he argued that the epistemology of African studies was invented within the framework of Western knowledge production. To mention Ngugi again, he spent years on the significance of language in the politics of knowledge. Inarguably one of his best-read books, Decolonizing the Mind, Ngugi centralized the role of language in shaping cultural identity. And he argued that the continued use of the colonizer's language will keep Africans intellectually dependent. He asserted that writing in one's language is a political statement of defiance that makes it even clearer. He once challenged me at a seminar that I should be writing stories in Yoruba. He challenged me to write essays in Yoruba. From a literary angle, Chinua Achebe criticized the representation of Africans in Western literature, such as The Hearth of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, stating that it was dehumanizing and that Africa should be part of the literary discourse. More recently, a younger colleague of mine, Sabelo Nlofi Gacheni, brought to attention the idea of epistemic freedom in order to emphasize that it is necessary to disconnect oneself from Western epistemology while connecting with other parts of the world. Some of these scholars that I've mentioned, numerous others that I've not mentioned, have made African studies into a subject that requires engagement rather than a retrieval of knowledge. Kenyatta University, through Professor Peter Wekesa, insisted that I speak about my own intellectual interventions. And this will be part 6 of my lecture. My intellectual journey should also be placed within the broader perspective of not only resistance, but of reconstruction. As a scholar, I've always been making attempts to widen the scope of African historiography, placing emphasis on African indigenous epistemologies and pushing the boundaries of scholarly inquiry. Before this lecture, I circulated a media piece, Why I Write on decolonization to list my reasons, my engagement, and my scholarship. In decolonizing African knowledge, autoethnography and African epistemologies argue that the utilization of autoethnography can be a means through which one moves from the self to scholarship. At a public lecture in Kenya, I told members of the audience in a full hall that they should take autoethnography very seriously. I argue that you and I and your families constitute archives. And when you construe yourself as an archive, we call that discipline autoethnography. And as you pay serious attention to ethnography, you begin to see how your body, your embodied knowledge, is an embodied archives. And you can use it to write about your families, about your villages, about your communities, and about your countries. I coined the phrase, the self is an archive. The self is an archive. The students listening to me today, you're not just processing knowledge, you can create an archive. And you and I will be enriched by the possibilities of yourself as an archive. That is self, you as a person, is made up of memories and cultures. Those memories may be peculiar to you, and you may not know that by releasing those peculiar memories, you are decolonizing and extending the frontiers of knowledge. And as you do that, you create a library, a phenomenon in scholarly conversation. In my elaboration with Yoruba intellectual traditions, I offer various examples of the sophistication of indigenous epistemologies. In an earlier work, Yoruba Gurus, I show that African communities developed comprehensive intellectual traditions, which include philosophy, ethics, and cosmologies, and that indigenous traditions are not simply part of culture, but you have to see them as a wellspring of theories. In Decolonizing African Studies, my book, Knowledge Production, Agency, and Voice, I propose a shift in the way African studies should be done. I argue that African studies cannot remain rooted in their colonial past, but they must be reinvented to take African perspectives into account. The transformation must not only involve new subject matter, but also a reconceptualization of methodology. One of the crucial elements of this intervention involves extending the archives. I promote the incorporation of oral histories, visual culture, performance, and practice into the scope of archives. By adding alternative archives, alternative in quotes, because they're integral to themselves, we open up new horizons for scholarship. And I've demonstrated that this is not just about making statements that cannot be validated. And if you ask me how, why, I've shown in various books, and I will mention just three, that indigenous archives exist. I've written 2 books on spirituality, very well received, one of them translated into Portuguese, and an ongoing translation into China. And I recently released a book, Yoruba Metaphysics, that the concepts you hear in the villages, in your neighborhoods, are archives of knowledge. And using Yoruba concepts, I developed a book of over 400 pages on how indigenous concepts that you hear in your villages and communities are knowledge libraries. In a forthcoming book on divination, I studied a Yoruba diviner by the name of Elebuibon. And the next 2 months, a book of mine on Ifa craft and this priest and the knowledge that he embodied in one person is used to broaden the knowledge system through what the Yoruba call Ifa. For those of you who have read the Bible, if you put Ifa into the print system, it is longer than the Bible. And I recently revealed to some people that why don't they interrogate how one person can put into memory that extensive texts. It's like saying you can have one person who can recite the entire Bible by rote. And why is that possible? And I told them that we have not paid attention to knowledge ritual and how that ritual triggers memory and understanding. When I was young, I tried to memorize 2 chapters of the Bible, and I can recite them line by line. Apart from writing, I've contributed in other ways through institutions, teaching, mentoring, and collaborating that Professor Wekesa has mentioned. Every summer, I travel to different African countries. Last summer, I was in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, going to so many universities and teaching, lecturing for free. And I'm encouraging my colleagues to do the same. In this master class, I will not be only one who is teaching. Other colleagues will teach. What is the value of knowledge that you acquire that you do not share? If you keep that knowledge to yourself, you have wasted 2/3 of your time collecting it. To those of you who pose a question, where are the esoteric knowledge, the scientific knowledge created in Africa? I want to use these opportunities to say that we made 2 big mistakes, and we should not repeat them. The first is not sharing this knowledge. So you have the knowledge of the rainmaker, the knowledge of the herbalist, the knowledge of the established doctor who knew about plants. But by not sharing them, we fail to transfer that knowledge forward. To students here, as I encourage you to do autoethnography, I'm also encouraging you to be very active in your communities insisting that keepers of knowledge must release them. It's a challenge that we have to face, because if you hoard knowledge, you're empowering yourself, no doubt, but you are also, by not releasing that knowledge, not transforming the next generation. The second mistake we did is to put sciences and technologies and engineering insistently and consistently into mythical and metaphysical terms without releasing them. I've traveled in many African societies, and you'll be surprised that some of what you call Western knowledge, like the internet, the WhatsApp, the telephone, the airplane, Africans had created those ideas for a long, long, long time, dating back to Kush, to Axum, to Egypt, to the Yoruba people. And I will illustrate with a few examples. In the part of Africa where I come from, there was one of the biggest empires in the continent called the Oyo Empire. It's huge. It was a huge empire, stretching at some point to the Ghana people, to the borders of what you now call Republic of Benin and Togo. There emerged a 4th century king called Shango. Shango ultimately became the Yoruba god of thunder and rain. If you study Shango very well, his capacity to conjure rain, his capacity to spit fire, those are processes of electrical engineering, thermodynamics, physics. But instead of running with them, conducting experiments, what it did was to lock them in mythology and not release them. In that same empire, and as among the Yoruba, people believed that you could reduce distances through flight, what airplanes now do. You could raise up a leg and you disappear. Modern technology has made that possible. You could create statue and invest them with power. Robotic engineering has done that. You could create binary knowledge systems. The internet has done that. You could speak without not being seen, which your cell phone is doing. And today, as we accumulate those ideas, we should release them from mythologies and begin to work towards the conversion of knowledge to sciences and technology. I want to talk about our epistemic future. What is our epistemic future? For those of you still in school, doing your PhD thesis, the future of scholarship in Africa must grow. And for it to grow, it will require doing so while managing the complexities of rigor. That's not enough. The complexities of hard work, that's not enough. But the complexities of imaginations. the complexities of imaginations. Imagination in the street language is what we call dreams. If you don't have the capacity to imagine, moving forward is very difficult. As a scholar, I've tested myself so many times. To what extent can I push my own imaginations? What ideas can occur to me that I will work upon? And I imagine myself not just as a hard worker, but as building a process of imaginations. I started a series on textbooks, and I told myself, why can't I publish 7 textbooks? 3 have been released. Why can't I imagine new topics? I'm currently writing a book on African sciences and technologies. Younger people are blessed with capacities for creativities, imaginations, new thinking. Universities have to cultivate and promote these imaginations. But suppose universities are not doing that. You as an individual can do that. The collectives listening to me in combined classrooms, where in one case 200 students gather, but the Zoom is representing them as one person, can imagine. It is not the universities that produce new forms of music, the Afrobeats. If you go to Kenyan nightclubs, that's what they are going to play. My first club in Uganda last summer, they were playing Afrobeats as we entered. Those are the imaginations of young people. The new fashion you all wear, they are creative imaginations. The Nollywood, the film you produced, they are processes of imaginations. Decolonization will require creativity. And that creativity, you have it in abundance. The way nature creates the connection is that it empowers younger people to be more creative in how they think and what they aspire to. And within the knowledge system, you have to generate ideas and theories and methodology generation. You must promote the languages of Africa. I know that many of you cannot use an African language. I'm not criticizing you, but I'm challenging you that within 6 months, you can learn the language. It is not only necessary to translate from one language to another, but to create knowledge in these languages. At the same time, it will be necessary for you to interact with the rest of the world as Africans. We should be able to use the virtual facilities to connect even when survival and inadequate resources will not allow us to travel. We are not going to seclude ourselves from the world. We will engage with the world, but it has to be on an equal basis. What is our role as custodian of epistemic justice? I was given 1 hour, I will spend the 1 hour. Decolonization of knowledge cannot be viewed as an end stage. We can declare victory. It's not a war with an end. The colonization of knowledge is what must be done continuously by several generations of academics working in different disciplines of academia, coming from different parts of the world. A new generation after me will disagree with some of what I've said. They will disagree, they will agree, they will modify them, they will rethink them, they will put them to different use. This effort of continuous knowledge is required because power constantly changes itself and thus cannot be permanently abolished or destroyed. At this moment in geopolitics, you are witnessing how powers are returning to the 19th century gunboat diplomacy. Power will continue to do so, and so also must knowledge be permanently on the move for reinvention. This effort requires courage. And without courage, you cannot defy the dominant epistemology. A coward, so goes a proverb, dies multiple times. You must note that decolonization of knowledge involves challenging an entire system of epistemological domination. Africa should not be relegated to the margins of knowledge production. It needs to reclaim its place at the center. And speaking about and interpreting the experiences of the African people must become our imperative. Let me be very clear to students and researchers, members of the public, enthusiasts. You have a dual inheritance. On the one hand, this inheritance is fragmented. On the other hand, it is fecund. Why? Because there is so much yet to be discovered, so much to be analyzed, and many things to be interpreted in the languages of our people, our collective memory, and our mind. Suppose someone were to ask you, after you leave this space, what are your takeaways? What are your takeaways? What are your takeaways? Let me tell you what the takeaways will be. First, always interrogate the foundations of knowledge. Do not accept any canon as neutral. Ask a question: who produced this knowledge? For what purpose? Under what conditions? To decolonize is to question not only previous answers, but the very questions that were posed and deemed legitimate. Second, reclaim and expand the archive. I've told you how to expand this archive through your own self-intervention. Your sources are not limited to libraries and databases. They're in your communities, in your neighborhoods, in your mosques, in your churches. They're in sources you inherited, in traditions, songs, proverbs, rituals. Then everyday life practices of people. In those everyday life practices, As you enter those buses, struggling to enter them on the streets, as you buy food on the roads, as you interact with people, you are doing daily practices. I'm writing on daily practices that you take for granted. How you buy water on the roads, how you talk to people, we call them daily practices. I've done 2 books on daily practices in post-colonial Africa, daily practices in colonial Africa, and they were releasing a book of mine in July on daily practices in colonial Africa. Daily practices are archives, and everybody listening to this conversation engages in daily practices. They are tests, they are called tests that we should begin to pay attention to. Third, theorize and do not only read theories. It's not enough just to be citing other people, but we can create what we can also cite. It is not as difficult as you think. A proverb can be converted into a theory. Your daily practices in Nairobi and Lagos are theories, if you have the capacity to convert them. The continent must not become a minefield whose information is analyzed somewhere else. You must think about Africa, theorize about Africa, develop ideas that will make an impact on thinking across the world. The fourth takeaway, embrace methodological pluralism. Do not foreclose on methodological rigor. Do not foreclose it. Decolonization does not mean replacing one set of scientific norms with another, but pluralism in which methodologies are drawn from many sources while creating yours. Fifth, engage with the world without losing yourself. Decolonization is not about being isolationist. It's about participating as equals. So you must engage with global discourses, but make sure you are also engaging with your own histories, languages, and philosophies. And finally, perhaps most important of all, take up the moral imperative that accompanies scholarship. All knowledge has implications. All knowledge has implications. The way you tell your story has consequences. How you frame your arguments, there are consequences. What you leave unsaid have consequences. All of this will serve to construct Africa and Africans. When you write irresponsibly, especially in the age of social media, you are creating harms. But when you write responsibly, you contribute to justice. I appeal to all the students listening to me to be responsible and to make sure that the ideas they generate contribute to epistemic justice. Thank you very much. And I'm ready to take all your questions. I'm very grateful.
Uh-oh. Thank you very much, Prof, for that very insightful lecture. We really appreciate your insights on the decolonization debate, especially on the takeaways. I think they incite all of us. I'll just mention a few of them to guide the discussion and, of course, open the session to the Q&A based on the questions that I've received so far. I think from your discussion, and I'll go with the proverb that you mentioned, a coward dies multiple times. This sets the agenda for what we want to do and how we need to move forward. The debate on decolonization of knowledge is not, as you put it, an end in itself. It's actually a continuous process of engagement. And the more we engage, the more we argue about issues and put our agenda across, the more we will stop being relegated to the margins of knowledge production. And I think that's a major takeaway. Part of your conviction, and I think all of us who are listening to you will be very glad to take up on this challenge and, of course, conviction, which is that the knowledge that one acquires or collects must be shared. If you are a keeper of knowledge which you cannot be able to share with others, which you cannot be able to release to others, you become irrelevant. But the more you share it in whichever form that there is, the more you open up more discussions, the more you enrich your discussions and further the discussions around these conversations. I want to really thank you for those very, very enriching conversations. For our students and our colleagues who are on board, I think this is a great challenge to all of us, especially those of us who teach African history. The issue of theory, as I mentioned earlier, is one that we have least interrogated in our interactions with our students. And we really want to encourage our students to courageously pick up this discussion and, of course, move forward the discourse. Changes take place. There's nobody who is here permanently, even those who to die multiple times will eventually die. So we need to interrogate some of these issues and enrich our scholarship around many of those issues that we are discussing. So once more, Prof, thank you for giving us the opportunity to set up and, of course, set the pace for this masterclass. In terms of how the structure of the questions will be, I think let me begin with what I have received first. What are alternative methodologies that exist to challenge the dominance of Eurocentric perspectives? I think this is something that you have spoken about, but it's more important for you to enrich us much more. Do we have alternative methodologies, especially from your earlier discussion on the existing Eurocentric perspectives? What is there for us as African scholars and African students of history?
Thank you very much. Actually, it's going to be part of the second master class in this series on decolonization. It's not going to be about the mere replacement of one epistemological approach by another, or even the exchange of two competing paradigms. Because move in that direction, the formulation will itself be too easy. Because it will mean accepting readily the very logic that we are critiquing. Because we are critiquing the logic of singularities. We are critiquing the logic of hierarchies and universals. So the issue at hand is rather more fundamental than that, in my own thinking. Is a shift from epistemic singularity to epistemic multiplicity. And this shift will require not just a recognition of the value of other epistemic techniques, but a questioning of the notion of universality itself. So we must begin with the reminder that this very concept of universal arose within a particular social context. Take, for instance, Western epistemology did not arise in a vacuum. It emerged within the context of colonialism, imperialism, and the construction of epistemic regimes, wherein certain perspectives were elevated, while other viewpoints remained suppressed. Those of you who have studied the Mau Mau in Kenya, for instance, will relate to what I'm saying. How do you study the Mau Mau? Are you studying it from the epistemic regime of the British people and domination? Or are you studying it from the epistemic regime of the Kikuyu? The archive, the classroom, they are all sites of knowledge production, where the Mau Mau and all ideas about Africa are simultaneously studied and epistemically subjugated. So to decenter Eurocentrism is not to just merely add an African perspective to an existing regime, or rather to question this very regime. And critical to this shift in perspective, we must realize that knowledge is always situated. Knowledge comes into existence at certain culturally, historically, and experientially situated places. And if you use the Mau Mau as an example, you can locate those situated places. Language, memory, environment, power, they influence how we create knowledge. Thus, the universal knowledge that claims to be objective reality is actually a political claim. Let me repeat for the benefit of providing answer to that important question, that universal knowledge is a political claim because it hides its own situatedness. It hides it while denigrating other situated knowledges. If you promote African epistemology, you must accept the situatedness of knowledge. So when I made a call in the lecture to ethnography, it's going to acquire a new meaning if you connect it to the methodology. Because unlike other methodologies, as I explained in my book, Decolonizing African Knowledge, it's not just a technique, because sometimes we teach students technique, but we don't connect them to epistemologies. Technique is how you acquire the skill to do something. Epistemology is how you develop philosophy around it. I must make the case that the self is not an impediment to knowledge production. but an integral part of it. If you were to wake up all the Mau Mau fighters and they do the self-stories, you will see how what they give us will be different from what you are going to find in the British archives. They will give us experience. They will give us memory, embodiment. And we cannot ignore any of this. And we have to use them to gain knowledge. In several African cultures, we usually don't make a distinction between those who know and what is known. Let me repeat, those who know and what is known. And we don't create a difference. We don't separate between the researcher and what is being researched. We don't make that separation. So ethnography as a methodology will align well with indigenous epistemology. But this is just one of these many approaches, many of the epistemological approaches. And reducing epistemological paradigms of Africa to a single approach is not going to work. Even one as reflective as autoethnography, because it can become reductionist. So it has to be a multifaceted, interdisciplinary, to an extent that we cannot be categorized by Western standards. In this way, there will be so many narratives. Some will be in literary forms, some will be located in history, in philosophy, social control. How do groups use stories in the form of fables? The fables we learn in elementary schools, the stories we are told, they convey information. They have values, they have identities, they have knowledge, but we have not tapped into them enough. I'm from a part of Africa where they speak in proverbs all the time. These are philosophical in nature, collective wisdom that we cannot trace to a specific author. Performances in terms of rituals, dance. In Plateau State, for instance, in Nigeria, they have over 200 dance forms, theater, drama. And these are significant arena for epistemology. You cannot be in any African town, village, city without performance. And in that performance, heart becomes knowledge. Meanings are expressed in actions, meanings in speech. When you see his performance on the roadside, it's an epistemology. They are giving you ideas, they are giving you an archives, but we don't put them to use. And if you're Yoruba or Igbo or Kikuyu, you will see how when they tell stories, they bring in the tiger, they bring in the elephants. These are non-human realities of matter and spirit. They're material, they're spiritual, they're symbolic. We cannot throw those things away. Our surroundings consist of the material world and the metaphysical world. We can't throw that away. We cannot say we are separating spiritualism from epistemology. Those of you who go to Pentecostal churches already know this. You're a professor of physics, but you believe in witchcraft. We are not going to dismiss that. We have to see that spiritualism, epistemology in conjunction. What can we see as I'm looking at you now, listening to me? But what can I not see? They are also important as epistemology. And we cannot just say we'll be dealing with scientific facts alone. It's not enough. It's not enough. We also have to deal with how people behave, how they think. I've been in an accident. I was the only one who survived. People will say, that is not science. That is spirituality. And we cannot dismiss, in studying our people, intuitive facts, intuitive, the cultural cognitions that propel them. Many years ago, I told my mom that I did not believe in witchcraft. She was afraid. She panicked. Why? She said, I should never say that again, because a witch could hear me say, I don't believe, and the witch will kill me. That's not science. That is a belief, and in panicking about me, that is what we call an intuitive fact. We have not successfully integrated all these dimensions into the way we study our people. Interdisciplinarity, yes, we keep saying so, but we have to pay attention to it. It presumes the existence of different fields. What we have done is to take how the West constitutes department of history, department of literature, department of anthropology, philosophy. Bear in mind that we borrow that to shape what we do. So there are universities in Africa, but not African universities. When we create African universities, we will not necessarily borrow how Westerners have created these departments. We will relabel these departments according to our own inheritances. Department of kingship, for instance. Department of divination, and we work with our organic knowledge. Knowledge does not belong to any of these disciplines. It doesn't belong to them. It is us in the process of creating diplomas, moving from graduate student to assistant lecturer to professor. It is us who now say knowledge belongs to these disciplines. And in the process, we compartmentalize them. There can be no history without culture. There can be no history without politics. So you can't say, I'm separating the Department of Culture from the Department of Politics. I'm separating the Department of Politics from the Department of History. In reality, that is not how it works. And to realize this new vision of alternatives as you frame this question, we must challenge the hegemony of a Western system and Western production. We have to challenge it. We have to challenge the hegemony of knowledge, Western knowledge production. It's not simply a structural question. We have to see it as an epistemic one. We must pose the question, what kind of knowledge counts? What kind of knowers exist? And whose epistemologies are legitimate? When we break from an hegemony that involves creation of spaces that can enable other epistemologies to grow, it is not just the process of critique. It is not just a supplementary task. It is all about providing opportunities, creating transformative spaces where epistemologies are not dominated, or they can thrive. New ones can emerge. And in these new ones, new disciplines will emerge, new ways of studying realities will emerge. And we'll begin to question hegemonic paradigmatic spaces. We have to question them. And we have to say, how can we reorganize knowledge systems, creating new departments with their certification, and they will produce so many forms of methodologies, ways of knowing, and what you call alternate methodologies, but we won't call them alternative. We will call them autonomous methodologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. That has been a very elaborate answer to what initially appeared to be a short question. It has been a very rewarding addition to what you already presented. I'll move on to the second question, and this sounds more personal, but one that is going to be very enriching, especially on your agenda, what you presented as your epistemic future. And I just want to quote what a student asked. Colonial education systems and their legacies have been central in shaping historical knowledge production on and about Africa. That's the end of the quotation. How do you, this is to you, Professor Toyin Falola, located in the American Academy, succeed in dismantling these intellectual legacies?
Thank you, and I'm very grateful. They've asked me that question so many times. Sometimes it's not just me. They ask Achebe, they ask Ngugi, how do you study Africa from United Kingdom, from Japan or China, from the US? How do you dismantle those legacies from there? So we can reduce the problem of space positionality. I have to apologize to the student that scholars sometimes we frame some ideas in terms of what you call an academic language. Because when I convert what a student is saying to an academic language, it's talking about two issues. Space positionality, where are you located? And intellectual positionality. How do you combine them? And what implications do they have? Now, when we reduce it in terms of that binary, we are underestimating the intricate nature of the process of knowledge construction. So, using my own case, being positioned within the US does not mean I'm endorsing colonialism or imperialism. I live in Texas, but I'm a critic of US foreign policy. I'm a critic of Trump's war in Iran. I'm being positioned in Kenya or Lagos is not necessarily liberation from oppression. Because I have many people in Nigeria who support Trump. And I'm based in the US and I don't support Trump. So while location is important, but it doesn't mean, and I'm grateful, that this question was posed, that we position ourselves within that location. It doesn't mean that. The US academia, just like any institution which has been constructed historically, has contradictions embedded in its structure. All academies have contradictions, and the US academia has contradictions. It is burdened with the heritage of the Eurocentric tradition. But you have scholars living in that space who also disrupt that tradition. I live in Texas, but I disrupt that tradition. I disrupt it. But you can have someone living in Kenya or Uganda who will say, and I've heard them say, that they are grateful for the slave trade. People have said that. I've seen people in Nigeria who said, why can't the British come back? And I've seen people in Uganda who said, why are you teaching Chinua Achebe? Go back to Shakespeare. I hope you get the point I'm making. The process of intervention can also take the form of the production of literature. You create texts, books, essays, and volumes. It's not just a scholarly process, but a political one as well. I read the history of West Africa, and the government in East Africa went to Routledge and said, can we buy 1,000 copies so that our students can use? I wrote that book in the US. They want to distribute it in East Africa. So I engage in this scholarly process, which is a political one of advancing the history of West Africa. The process of creating knowledge requires participation in a debate. And in that debate, irrespective of your location, you can say you are engaging in decoloniality, in the construction of reality, questioning ideas and proposing new ones. Therefore, from a political perspective, writing will offer you a chance to engage in a debate that must either consider or not consider African point of view. So, as a prolific writer, to be specific to myself, since that's the way the student posed the question, I challenge tool of domination. I challenge it. I appeal to Africans to create theories rather than become objects. That if we view Africa as a field of study, we must empower it by generating our own ideas and epistemologies to understand what we study. I'm not saying we should reject theories from elsewhere, but we have to domesticate them. Those of you who have Christians, you will see how you've domesticated the Bible. While you receive Christianity, you must see how you have Africanized Christianity. You must see how you've taken ideas from the Old Testament, from New Testaments, combined them to create your own alternative methodologies. We must always shift, as I practice, conceptual framework. So whether if you're in Kenya or Lagos or New York, if you change from object to subject of research, you are engaging in personal development as a student, You are engaging in intellectual development. And the writing you generate will represent the shift you are making. You create a text. We are adding that text to a collection of other works. Those other works can disrupt dominant discourses, can propose alternative ways of thinking. Gradually, as all of you produce new body of knowledge, we begin to change the landscape. We create room for new voices. Remember, you can't say you are a young person. You can't say that because that youth is in itself the context of knowledge you are creating. When Chinua Achebe wrote Things Fall Apart, he was second-year student. Was a second-year student. He did not write Things Fall Apart at my age. He wrote Things Fall Apart as a student. Many of you here have voices. But if you engage in a powerful tool as in writing or in performance, you are constructing something new, as those Afrobeats people have constructed something new. You can produce knowledge institutionally in journals, universities, and conferences. But you can also produce them outside the space of institutions. Institutions are not neutral because they require legitimacy. So for you to transform knowledge, it is not just going to be about where you live, but about your own intervention. So your students from University of Lagos or Kenyatta, in the process of acquiring degree, that institutional formation will take the center stage. But it's not the only one that you have. It's just organizing you temporarily to have a degree. It's creating spaces. So what locations will do is that they create spaces for epistemic communities. But you can convert that epistemic communities into oppositions to existing paradigms. Take, for instance, this platform we're discussing. In that process of conversation, you can reject, affirm, reproduce. You can formulate research agenda. You can collaborate on projects. You can mentor younger people. And as part of the mentoring process, a student who has me the question, students listening, is a process of thinking, conducting research, not necessarily bound to one single location. You can engage with existing theories, you can depart from them. A student in Kenyatta asked me when I was there physically, will professors accept my methodology? And I said, if the professor doesn't accept your methodology, that is not just a function of yourself that is creating new ideas, but a function of the professor who does not have the outlook and the expansiveness to accommodate your methodology and refine it. You can belong to professional networks that is not limited to Namibia, Ghana. In those professional networks, members of the networks can be drawn from Lagos and China, Gambia, and Japan, which gives you broader collaborations. You can create your own platform. When I was teaching in Nigeria, I created a platform, and And when Dr. Wekesa was introducing me, he referenced my Toyin Falola interviews. This is a platform. Since creating these platforms, people have suggested topics we should do on civil service, on the military. Those are not location-bound questions. And in all these initiatives, the older ones, the newer ones, the ones yet to be created, knowledge cannot be created without infrastructure. No matter how groundbreaking your ideas are, no matter how original they are, there must be means through you that you have to present them. You have to argue with them, and they have to spread. What the colonial government did was they used institutions to ensure that their modes of knowledge became dominant. And they created institutions that support the knowledge that they developed and maintained, which we can do the same. Universities, scientific research centers, publishing houses, you have to consciously create them to produce multiple ways of knowing, multiple attentions to different epistemologies. I've been to Kenyatta University, and it has opportunities to create platforms, not bound to specific location. And it's a capacity to create these new platforms that will allow someone in New York to advance the project of Africa and to check somebody in Lagos that is advancing the project of imperialism. I don't give brief answers to questions because questions emanate from thinking, and we have to address them as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I think your very lengthy responses are worth it. We really appreciate your conversations around these issues. I want to actually thank the students and colleagues who are on this call for the many questions that are streaming in. I don't think we can stop listening to Prof because of the way in which he explains most of the issues. I just, in the interest of time, because we have to stop in the next 5 minutes, I just want to synthesize two questions and, of course, put them across to Prof as they have come in. The first one, and of course, this is tied to the very elaborate answer that you have given in linking up what you call space positionality and, of course, intellectual positionality. It got some of us thinking about the huge conversation that went on in the 1990s between Professor Ali Mazrui and, of course, Professor Ache Mafeje on recolonization. The argument put forward by Professor Ali Mazrui that some regions of Africa, especially those that are undergoing political challenges, need to be recolonized. So the location becomes a very useful space to really think about how epistemic communities are constructed and how they shape discourses around the huge bets on decolonization. So let me ask this. With the current challenges in Africa, this is a question from one of my students again. With the current challenges in Africa, mainly associated with historical constraints, weak institutions, and many, many others. What are the chances that the continent and its people will overcome these challenges and, of course, get it right? You hold on that. I post the second one because this now appeals much more to our young audience, our students, so that you can answer them at once in the next 5 minutes, Prof. And this second question reads, the young population in Africa is not only restive, but is increasingly becoming more disillusioned. What proposals can you provide to keep their hopes alive? Can the knowledge economy reignite their hopes? I think you can link up, you can see the failures of the state, and of course, what this is doing to our young population, especially those who are aspiring to pursue education. Can they get saved from the current kind of regimes that we have? Prof, it's your turn. If you can do it in 5 minutes, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I understand where the questions are coming from. And the disturbing phenomenon that many African youths have checked out of Africa. Wherever I travel to, that questions come up over and over again. If you are in Uganda, Kenya, you find many young people going to Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Gulf states. They're now going to China, they're going to Japan. And in this migration, they are tied to those two questions: overcoming challenges, shrinking opportunities, and the overall failure of modernity. I don't want to disturb the mind of the student that has a question by saying that in their lifetime, given the expansive nature of artificial intelligence, many jobs will disappear. So many jobs are going to disappear because of the advanced nature of AI, including robotic science. The jobs that are going to survive this new technological revolution are less than 5, unfortunately. But having said that, bear in mind that the capacity of Africa to encounter challenges and survive are extremely impressive. Extremely, extremely impressive. They survived the transatlantic slave trade. Over more than 30 million people were taken. They survived it. They survived colonization. That's why we're independent, in spite of the limitations. They survived Ebola. They survived COVID. They survived hegemonic oppression. They survived in one way or the other domination. So the capacity to survive, if you understand it historically, will give hope to a person like me that we are going to survive many of these challenges. The challenges of bad governance, the challenges of imperialism. And I'm glad that there's a student who also has this question, because part of these challenges will mean that young men and women must re-engage, and they must connect themselves to knowledge economy that will help. They must know that at the heart of the transition is about inclusion, that we cannot exclude them from governance. You can see from their complaint in Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana, they have to be taken seriously in terms of inclusivity and empowerment. Universities must say, how do we empower young men and women by rethinking knowledge systems? And I've argued that we must blend skills with academic training. And I've developed proposals that you can have a BA in history with skills in any field that can generate an income. That we just don't have to give you a degree that has limited connections with global forces and with global economy. So the challenge is to rethink the system, to say we are not dropping the humanities or social sciences, we are expanding them. But we must know, and this is going to be my concluding statement, that post-colonial modernity has not been successful. It is generating disconnect, generating anger, and the state and those who manage the state must sit down and say, what kind of modernity are we looking for? How do we disconnect? How do we connect urban centers with rural areas to re-energize the capacity that we can connect with indigenous knowledge system? Thank you very much. I hope I've kept to your time.
Thank you very much, Prof. And we, as usual, appreciate your interventions on these issues. I want on this note to really thank you first for finding the time to share with us. This has been your cardinal duty, sharing the knowledge which you have acquired. And I think you have succeeded in doing this. This knowledge is indeed empowering, it's indeed liberative, and as most of the students will appreciate, this will add a lot to what they have studied in class. I want to encourage them to keep sending in those questions because they'll form a conversation which will be going on later. And as Prof earlier indicated, this is just the first part. There are other conversations that are coming up to the advanced level where certification will be given. So we want you to be connected to this kind of discussion and debate. On a positive note, Prof has indicated to the young guys who are here, you don't have to lose hope. We shall overcome, we shall survive. If we have survived every aspect that he has mentioned, slavery, colonialism, there's nothing that is before us that cannot make us survive. So I want to encourage you that there is hope. Let's take our studies more seriously. Let's engage much more, and let's take much of our energies and time to do what is right for the African continent. So, Prof, thank you very much. Our technicals behind this call, more specifically Ajadi, we want to thank you for facilitating this conversation. We'll keep you in touch. I want to bring this session to an end. Thank you very much, and God bless you as you face a new day. Those of you who are in Kenya, and those of you who are joining from elsewhere, I cannot stop thanking a few members from other universities and colleagues. I know that we have members here from KCA, Karatina, Mount Kenya, a few of them from other places outside Kenya. Please feel appreciated. We want this engagement to go on and on. The more you attend, the more we actually become empowered and liberated. Thank you very much, and God bless you.